What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the build that I used for our Unchained run with Mayflower. This is the Blackrose Prison run. That is a no-death speed run, so under 40 minutes, and without using the sigils. So this is the tank build that I used, and I'll show you guys a couple of different sets that we played around with in our Unchained progression, in case you guys also want to consider using those sets as well. So this is going to be a fairly short build video compared to the rest of my build videos on my channel, mainly because there's really only a handful of sets that we need to go over. Of course, I will explain why I'm using each of the abilities that I am, and I will be releasing a boss video for each of the 5 different bosses in Blackrose Prison, or I should say the last round in the 5 different arenas in Blackrose Prison, at a later date, so you guys can kind of know what the strategy is for these bosses, both from a tanking perspective, a DPS perspective, as well as a healer perspective. So let's the rest of our build videos. I'll be going over all of my gear, all of my champion points, all of my skills, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build. Now I will take note here that Unchained is a very difficult achievement to get, so this is a very optimized build for getting that Unchained achievement. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I will be going over a couple of sets that we played around with while we were progressing to that point where we could get Unchained. So these sets should still be able to work if you want to wear them for your personal Unchained run, but this is eventually what we ended up going with, both to be able to get the speed down as well as the no death down. So let's get started here first with our gear. So the Monster Helm set, there was really only one choice here, and that was going to be Thurvokun. So this is a Monster Helm set that comes from not scale color big, it comes from Fang Lair, so you do need to have access to the Dragonguard DLC in order to grab this set. So we're using Thurvokun here because the 2-piece gives a AoE minor maim. So whenever you get damaged, you basically create this pool of growing bile, basically, that applies minor maim to everybody within the bile for 4 seconds. And because it basically lasts for 8 seconds and can occur every 8 seconds, you have a 100% uptime with minor maim, and then it's an AoE minor maim. So we're using Thurvokun here rather than using something like Choking Talons, because Choking Talons uses up resources. So we kind of want to conserve our max magicka for our reflective plate, reflective scales, because that is actually a very strong move in Blackrose Prison, especially in those ad pulls in Arena 3, as well as the boss fights for Arena 1 and Arena 2. So using Thurvokun in order to apply that minor maim is basically a resource-free way of doing so. Plus it also gives us additional max health, which gives us a little bit more survivability. And if a tank goes down, well, your Blackrose Prison run is going to get a lot harder very, very quickly. So if you're going for Unchained, I would highly recommend picking up Thurvokun. This is really the Monster Helm set that we really nailed down, as we need to have this set here. The 2 other Monster Helm sets that we played around with, mainly we initially tried to use Lord Warden, but we found that the DPS were moving around a little bit too much. Plus it was pretty much not very useful in Arenas 2, the final boss, Arenas 4, the final boss, and Arena 5, the final boss. So we ended up just scrapping Lord Warden and going with Thurvokun instead. You can still use Lord Warden for the boss fights. Thurvokun's very, very strong in the first 4 rounds for each arena, because those are all the ad pulls. And the boss rounds themselves, Thurvokun's going to be a little bit less useful because a lot of them don't have a lot of ads. The only one that really has ads is going to be Arena 2 and Arena 3, those 2 bosses, and as well as Arena 4. Arena 4 does have a lot of ads built in there as well. So Thurvokun is still useful in the boss rounds, but a little bit less so as a result. The other Monster Helm set that we considered using but ultimately did not run was Swarm Mother, and that's just to help me pull in the additional ads from rounds 1 through 4. Ultimately, we decided the minor maim would be more useful because it does reduce the damage incoming to the group, and that's going to be more important for survival comparing to chaining things in one by one. We decided to completely scrap the Swarm Mother idea and just focus in on basically just sort of really recognizing where all the ads are coming in from, which ones I can pull, and basically making sure I had enough magicka to chain everything in. So Swarm Mother is one option you might want to consider running, but it's better off just to kind of learn where all the ad spawns are and just learn to chain them and manage your magicka accordingly. Now, this set you definitely want to wear for Unchained progression. That's going to be Ebon, because you want the additional max health. It just adds survivability to you and everybody, your 3 other group members. So definitely pick up Ebon. This is a heavy armor set for Crypt of Hearts. So definitely pick this up. The only thing you want to make sure with Ebon is you don't want to wear it as your weapon, because whenever you bar swap, the bar swap bug with Ebon is still around, so you will end up losing that health when you bar swap, and so just make sure you're wearing it on your jewelry or your armor. Now the second set, we played around with a few options here, but ultimately we decided to stick with Alkosh. This is twofold. So the first is obviously for the resistance debuff that you get from Alkosh. It's an AoE debuff, which is really strong for those ad pulls, round 1 through 4 in all the arenas. Just makes the ad pulls go a lot faster, and I would say that the ad pulls in Blackrose Prison are typically going to be more dangerous than the boss fights. So the faster you can get through those ad pulls, the less danger you have of dying to missing a bash, to a heavy attack, to some other sort of mechanic from an ad. So Alkosh is really strong there. The second thing is it also allows you to contribute some damage as well. So you still have that additional physical damage over time whenever you use Alkosh. So you are contributing some damage as well when you are running Alkosh. So this was kind of the set that we ultimately decided to stick to, the typical Ebon Alkosh build. But Alkosh is just very strong. Again, the additional debuff you get on the enemies just makes the ad pulls go that much faster, plus additional damage you deal is noticeable on ad pulls as well, particularly if you're able to aim your Alkosh synergy basically towards a giant group of ads that you just pulled in. Now, the one sort of caveat with Alkosh is you got to make sure you're getting those synergies. So in our particular run, we had a Stamina Templar and we had a Sword Healer. So I was able to get Conduit, I was able to get Shards from our Stamina Templar, we had Orbs going, so I had 3 synergies, so I can get pretty decent Alkosh up times. But if you do not have a Sork, if you don't have a Max Sork, and let's say you have a Templar Healer and 2 Stamina Nightblades, for instance, then in that instance it might not necessarily be worth running Alkosh. So in that instance, you pretty much only you still have 3 synergies, so you can still get the Blood Altar if you're running that. You can get Purify from your Templar's Extended Ritual, and you can still get Orbs or Shards, but it's going to be a little bit more less consistent that way, because our Sword Healer was able to throw down Liquid Lightning pretty much all the time. I was getting plenty of orbs. Our Stamina Templar made sure to throw out shards every now and then. And of course, we also had the Blood Altar synergy as well. So I had plenty of synergies to use for Alkosh there. But if you're not running a Templar and a Sork, if you're not getting that many synergies, it might not necessarily be worth running Alkosh, because it is a little bit reliant on being able to get those synergies. Now, a few sets that we did play around with on our sort of Unchained progression here that you might want to consider using. The first one we tried to get was a Leeching. So Leeching is a heavy armor set that comes from Imperial City Prison. And this is here mainly for additional heal that we get from it. So when you take damage, you have a certain 8% chance to summon a cloud of leeching poison under the attacker, which deals a certain amount of poison damage every second for 5 seconds, and it heals you for 100% of the damage caused. So the idea behind this is I don't have to worry so much about health. I can focus in more on chaining the ads in, following the boss. Basically just improves my own survivability at the expense of that additional Alkosh synergy usefulness there. We did try it out for a few pulls, and I did do very well in terms of survivability, but then when I swapped over to Alkosh, I didn't really notice that much of a drop in survivability. Part of it was I was getting more used to the pulls, I was getting more used to what I can block, what I needed to do in order to survive, what I can dodge roll, things like that. So Leeching, I would say, is a good set to pick up while you're learning Unchained, while you're learning, how to get the ad stacks, what you can dodge roll, kind of making sure you're able to maintain the reflective scale on the boss fights, but ultimately I would probably end up swapping out of Leeching as soon as I can. It's more selfish than obviously Alkosh, so it'll definitely give you a lot of survivability, but it doesn't really help out your group. And with time for Unchained being 40 minutes, that's actually pretty fast, so you definitely want to try to get another set that contributes a little bit more to group DPS, so that way you have a little bit more leeway when it comes to that time component of Unchained. 2 other sets that we considered running. The first one is obviously Torok's Pact. This is basically a weaker version of Alkosh, but it's going to be more consistent. Ultimately, we ended up scrapping Torok's Pact mainly for 2 reasons. First of all, the one-handed enchant was cut in half, so the Crusher was not quite as strong anymore. And the second, we decided not to run block 8 on my back bar. So I'm not able to consistently get that full Crusher enchant value from the back bar. So we ended up just scrapping Torok's Pact, but it is still a pretty good set with that max health and the spell resistance. It is going to be pretty useful overall. The other set that we considered running, Right, it's going to be Alkosh Dragonguard, and the idea behind this was twofold. So the first, it would get me faster Warhorns, so that way people, the DPS were able to kill things a lot faster because we would have more Warhorns going on. I was the only one running Warhorn. Our Sword Healer was running Barrier or Light's Champion or the healing version of the Gate, or eventually we ended up just settling with Atronac for the additional DPS. So that just basically left me with the Warhorns instead. So the faster I could put out Warhorns, the more I was able to contribute to DPS that way. And then, of course, the bonuses from Dragon are still pretty decent for tanking. So wasn't losing that much in terms of survivability when I was using Dragonguard. The other thing was it also helped boosted my own survivability as well, because obviously I get resources back whenever I use an ultimate because I'm a Dragon Knight. So that just basically gave me a little bit more sustain, which ended up being very helpful. It reduced the cost of a Magma Shell, which is incredibly helpful. You really want to make sure you have Magma Shell up for certain portions of the fight. So Dragonguard kind of served two purposes there. It both gave me some additional survivability, but it also gave additional DPS. But again, ultimately we ended up with Alkosh because of the additional debuff. It allowed our DPS to kind of spec a little bit more into other CP nodes besides piercing, as well as the additional damage from the Alkosh proc itself. But Dragonguard, I did use it for quite a few of our Unchained pulls, so really I would probably say Alkosh or Dragonguard are going to be your best options for your second set for Unchained. I'm not really going to go over our character sheet too much. You already know I play Dark Elf Dragon Knight. Dragon Knight's definitely going to be the best. I typically spec at 50 health, 10 stam, 4 magicka for all my tank builds. Obviously, if you're not a Dark Elf, let's say you're like an Imperial, you have more health, you don't need to put as many points into health. But I would err on the side of higher health, and I would probably recommend getting at the very least 20k max magicka, because you will be using Reflective Scale, and that obviously eats into your magicka pools by a healthy margin. So if I were to redo this, I would actually probably drop 5 points from stam, put them into magicka, so I have a little bit more max magicka pools here. So you still want to hit a decent amount of health, though. You definitely want to get at least 35k or so max health. You can see here I'm sitting at 37k. So I definitely recommend getting more health is definitely better, especially when you're just starting the progression. But once you get comfortable, I would definitely say you can drop health a little bit and get a little bit more max magicka. Wonderstone. Magic Recovery, again, the idea is you want to get as much magic as you can, because Reflective Scale is a very, very strong move to use in Blackrose Prison. And then, obviously, Purple Food for max health, max magicka, max stamina. Now for skills, there isn't that much that you should change out here. So our front bar, this is our sword and board bar. Obviously you have your taunt, you have heroic slash, you have fragmented shield, you have balance. Just be a little bit mindful of when you use balance, because you are taking a lot of damage as a tank, obviously. Especially in the boss fights, you want to be a little bit mindful of when you cast balance, because it does eat up into your health. So just make sure to call out to your healer when you're using balance. Make sure that they are aware of when you're using balance, so that way they can top you off with heals. Especially because if you're not, this is really prevalent on Arena 3 and Arena 4, less so in Arena 1 and Arena 2. If you're able to get, basically use Dragonfire Scale effectively, you will be affected by a Defile, a very strong Defile, so just make sure you're definitely calling out to your healer, hey, I'm using balance, especially when you're just starting out. Then you have Shadow Silk. So this, we ended up using this mainly because the Shadow Silk synergy is really, really strong, especially because we were running 2 stamina DPS. I would still recommend running it even if you do have magicka DPS, because even on a magicka DPS, the synergy itself will provide easily 3 to 4k additional DPS, and it's a synergy, so you're getting it for free. So definitely recommend running Shadow Silk. The way I used it was I pretty much knew where all the big mobs are going to spawn, so whenever they spawn, I just threw out Shadow Silk over there, and one of the DPS typically was able to grab the synergy. So definitely a very strong synergy, and I would recommend running this. If you don't want to run this, though, you can definitely run something like Absorb Magic instead. I would recommend Absorb Magic, actually, because there are a lot of magic projectiles in the arena itself that you can absorb for additional health. Magma Shell here for the ultimate, definitely a lifesaver here. Would highly, highly recommend running Magma Shell for obvious reasons. Then our back bar, we have Inner Rage. This is our ranged taunt. Obviously, want to keep that. Green Dragon Blood. Dragon Fire Scale. So you can go with the other morph of Reflective Scale, which would be, I'm blanking on the name, Reflective Plate, if you would like. I ended up using Dragon Fire Scale because my reflective projectiles would deal more damage, and which would basically help kill things faster, which is definitely something you want to have if you're going for a speedrun. So Dragon Fire Scale is my personal recommendation. This is definitely going to be your key to survival in Blackrose Prison. A lot of projectiles are going towards you. Are the Arena 1 and the Arena 2 boss. Both these projectiles, you can reflect back at them. And when you reflect those projectiles, you do not get the bleed. I'm not sure if you don't get the bleed, but you definitely do not get the defile. So it makes it easier for the healer to heal you up. So I definitely highly recommend making sure you have Dragonfire Scale or the other Morph Reflective Plate. And definitely running it for all the arenas. So Arena 3, the ads, you have a lot of Magicka ads, you have the Infusers, you have the Cold Mages, you can reflect those back and deal a lot of damage to them that way, cutting down the time spent on ad pulls, cutting down your time spent, and cutting down the possibility of a premature death that way. So definitely a skill you definitely, I can't say this more than enough, you want this skill as a Dragon Knight tank in Blackrose Prison. Crushing Shock for the ranged interrupts. This is going to be more useful in Arena 2 against the boss there, Tames the Beasts. There are going to be some instances where you want that ranged interrupt, so you can I definitely recommend having this on hand, because when you don't have it and you need that ranged interrupt, you're going to wish you had it. And then obviously we have Unrelenting Grip to chain in all of these pesky little ads for all the arenas. Then Aggressive Warhorn. Aggressive Warhorn is going to be your primary ultimate, and there are going to be a few fights where you're going to be using Magma Shell instead. Again, I will be posting walkthroughs for each of the final arena fights where you're going to end up using Magma Shell in some of those fights. And finally, for our champion points. So I am max CP. I'm assuming you are also max CP. Blackrose Prison can definitely be cleared under max CP, but having more CPs is always going to be beneficial. So I have 64 Arcanist, 49 Tenacity. This gives me more Magicka regen, and then I get some more resource return from the Tenacity points. Then I have 61 Shadow Ward for the block cost reduction, 40 into Tumbling, 44 into Warlord, and I have 12 into Sprinter. You don't need to put 12 into Sprinter, but I found myself running around a lot, so it was nice to get a little bit of additional reduction in sprinting, especially because you will be sprinting between arenas. So you will be casting rapids between arenas to cut down on the time you have to spend to run from one arena to the next. So it is nice to be able to reduce that cost of sprint while you're sprinting to the next arena there. Blue CPs, pretty straightforward, pretty standard tank CPs, so 75 Bless, 81 Elfborn, you can go 100 100 if you would like. Then just put the rest into however you like, with 31 Mastered Arms, 28 Thaumaturge, 28 Piercings, 27 Mighty, just your typical tank CPs. Just make sure you have that 75 and 81 Elfborn here. In our red CPs, I am on Cloudra CP actually, so I do need to adjust this. But basically what you want to do is you want to go for a more balanced approach here, because you will be taking both spell and physical damage. So I would recommend going 64 Hardy, 64 Elemental Defender, 61 Thick-Skinned, and 81 Ironclad. This is the CP setup that I use for my Unchained clear. You definitely want to have more points in the Thick-Skin. So I've seen some people recommend a little fewer points into Thick-Skin, but I would not recommend that, because Thick-Skin is going to help reduce the damage from the bleed that is applied to you whenever you get hit by one of the Arena 1, Arena 2, Arena 3, and Arena 5 bosses. So all the bosses will, when they hit you with an attack, apply a bleed and apply an extreme defile. So I have heard arguments of, oh, run a couple of points on a quick recovery to increase the amount of healing received here. But the extreme defile is actually very strong defile. I believe, I haven't tested the exact numbers out, but I believe it's around a 60% defile. So your healing received is already reduced down to 40%, and adding in another 5% of quick recovery is not really going to change that much. It's only going to bump you up to about 45-50%. So you're still receiving half the healing that you normally get. So it is more beneficial to reduce the damage of the bleed that's applied to you, reduce the damage of your physical attacks, of the spell attacks, of the magical attacks that are hitting you instead. So I personally, again, this is the CP setup that I use to get that Unchained run. So 81 Ironclad is definitely something you want to have. You're taking a lot of direct damage here. 61 Thick-Skin, and this is mainly to help out with the bleed that you're going to have. There's a lot of dots in Blackrose Prison, a lot of imply, a lot of pressure on the tank. You have a lot of bleeds going on. This will help out against the Gargoyle bleed in Arena 3, it'll help out against the Flame God in Arena 1 and Arena 4, and it'll help out against the bleed that is applied on by all the arena bosses. So I highly recommend 61 Thick-Skin. 64 Hardy and Elemental Defender here, because you are taking both sources of damage. So Arena 1 boss does magical damage, assuming you're not able to reflect all the attacks. The Arena 2 boss deals physical damage. Arena 3 boss deals a combination of magicka and physical damage. And the Arena 5 boss is mostly physical damage, but the adds, you have a lot of different things coming in. Just thinking of the last arena, Arena 5, you have a lot of magicka damage, you have a lot of physical damage. So you definitely want to get that very, very balanced approach there. Alright, so that's pretty much it for the build itself. So again, I did go over a couple of the different gear sets that you might want to consider running as you're progressing through Unchained. This is the build that I ran when we got that Unchained title. So we know this sort of thing works here. Again, the set that you definitely want to pick up are going to be Thurvokun and Ebon. This Alkosh, you can swap this out accordingly. You can have Leeching, you can have Dragonguard, you can have Alkosh here. You can even run Torgs if you'd like. But we found Alkosh to be the most useful because of that, both the resistance debuff as well as the additional damage that you're able to provide as a tank that way. And again, be on the lookout for those individual boss fights. I will have them in separate videos, so it's going to be the Arena 1, Arena 2, Arena 3, Arena 4, and Arena 5. So all 5 arenas, those last fights, I will have separate videos for all of them, so you guys can get an idea of how to approach it, mainly from a tank perspective, but I will also be covering DPS and healer perspective, not perspectives, but kind of what you want to do in those 2 roles as well. So that's it for this build video. Let me know down in the comment section below if you guys have any questions about the Unchained progression, what you might want to, what I found to be useful. I'm more than happy to answer any sort of questions you have concerning Blackrose Prison and the Unchained progression that we went through. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.